Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm going to be going through how to do A-level history essays. In particular I'm concentrating on understanding the question, so what it's actually asking you to do, and there's various bits we'll look at in terms of the way that they're focused and the key hinges in different questions. And then I'm going to look at how you write it and with a particular emphasis on how to get the very top grade. So we'll be looking at structure, we'll be looking at good example paragraphs, we'll be looking at example introductions and example conclusions. So hopefully this video will give you all you need to start building those really good essays. They'll get you top grades in your A-level history. To start off with, I'm going to talk to you about the different question focuses or different question types. So there are a series of these. So you'll get some questions which are about the cause of something. So to what extent was poverty in England in the later 16th century the result of population growth? So in a cause question, it'll probably give you a cause, and then you'll have to show that there were other causes as well, and you have to compare that cause and its importance against other causes. You get consequences questions. So the Conservative stop-go economic policies in the years 1955 to 1964 fundamentally weakened the British economy. Assessability of this view. So that's asking you about the consequence of stop-go economics, and you can then argue about whether it does have that consequence or it doesn't. So you'd have half your essay look at go, well, yes, it was stop-go economics that fundamentally weakened British economy, and then you'd have the counterpoints which would go, well, no, it didn't fundamentally weaken British economy. So actually there was good bits about the economy during that period, or it was something else that weakened it. You can get change and continuity questions. So to what extent were the lives of women and young people changed as a result of communist rules in the years 1917 to 1941? So that's from a Russian unit. So and so you would have a series of points about the way that people's lives changed, and you'd have a series of points about how they didn't change. So there was a degree of continuity, and the communist rule didn't change the lives of these people in particular. You get similarities and differences questions. So how significant were the differences between northern and southern states circa 1845? So this one's an America question, it's from an American unit, and in that one you would say, well, actually there are these differences between the northern and southern states and in circa 1845, and there are these similarities between them. So there's similarities and you've got differences, and then you talk about which is more significant. Are the differences more significant or the similarities more significant? And then you've got significance as a whole. So peasant discontent posed a major threat to the Tsarist regime between 1894 and 1917. Assess the validity of this view. And so in that one you are looking at, well, how significant was the threat from peasant discontent, and you'd have half the argument saying, well, it is significant, and you have half your argument saying, no, it wasn't significant. So you've got the balance between those two different points. Now, the whole reason for starting with this is really important, because one of the things that I found through the years where students get off on the wrong foot in terms of answering an essay is they haven't identified the kind of the focus or type of question it is. So they start talking about consequence when actually the question is asking them cause, or they're talking about cause or consequence when actually they should have been talking about change in continuity or similarity and difference. And instead of talking significance, they're talking about cause again. So cause is the one that students seem to most like. I think it's the one. Is one of the things we tend to fall into in history. We want to know about why things happen, don't we? That's part of the reason why we all like history so much. So cause is great when you get it, but not all questions are going to be cause. And it's not just me, well, then it's not cause, it's consequence. It might be one of these other three. So one of the first things I suggest you do when you're given an essay as a homework, or you're doing it in an exam, or you just sat there doing some practice, is you kind of go, well, actually, which one of these is it? Which one of these am I trying to identify? Now, the other thing that we talk about in terms of questions is the stems. So the stem is essentially the question style. How is it set out? So I teach AQA A-level history, and the most common format of an essay question is a quote followed by assess the validity of this view. And then that kind of, you're going to have one of those focuses behind it is either going to be a cause or a consequence, or similarity and difference, or change in continuity. But you essentially, your format's going to be fairly straight. You're going to have a bit where you're saying, well, that view is right, and then you're going to be saying, no, that view isn't. Good old-fashioned A-level history style question is to what extent, but you also get variations of that, such as how important, how significant, how far. So there are a range of other ones that you might get, but they are the most common. So I'm going to use a range of examples as I go through some of the stuff that you should do. I've done a little bit of that already in terms of looking at those focuses and stems and things like that. So I actually teach two different A-levels at the same time in terms of A-level history. I teach A-level politics as well, just to keep my brain completely confused. So I teach Tudors as a Unit 1. I also teach a Unit 1 on Tsarist and Communist Russia. I teach a Unit 2 on the American Civil War, which is America, a nation divided, circa 1845 to 1877. And I teach a modern Britain Unit 2, so modern Britain 1951 to 2007. So there might be some examples that will come up, which are, well, there will be, examples will come up from those 4 units. You might study one of those 4 units, in which case the particular examples that I do from your unit might strike more of a chord or seem more pertinent to you. But it should be the case that actually, no matter which units you're doing, is actually the theory still holds up. The kind of things I'm telling you should do to get those good marks will work no matter what units you're doing. But for my students in particular, you're studying some of those, and hopefully you know which ones, and therefore there should be some kind of really useful things in that. If you are studying any of those 4 topics, then there are playlists with loads of content and stuff in them for all of those different units on my channel, Alan History Nerd. So if you go on my channel, you go into the playlist, you will find stuff on those particular units. There's also videos I've done on how to do interpretation questions and how to do source value questions. So the historian's interpretations or extracts, which is Unit 1, and the primary sources, which is Unit 2. So hopefully loads of other helpful things for you on the channel on top of what we're doing with this today. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to look at the essay questions on paper 1 for AQA. So this is a breadth unit, and therefore this adds a couple of extra bits in terms of the question and things you are thinking about. So the question has to cover at least 20 years. That's kind of the rules in the rubric. So any question asked must cover those 20 years, and you need to make sure you are covering those whole 20 years. And the other thing when they're setting questions on this that they're told they need to think about is that actually any question they ask should directly link to one of the key questions. Now, every one of the units has Unit 1 has 6 key questions, and it's really, really important that you know these when you're doing when you're studying, particularly when you're revising, because if you can talk about these 6 questions across the entire time frame of your unit, you should be able to do any of the questions that turn up on the exam. So this is how you should prepare. You might well be taught things in themes rather than just simply chronologically in school or college, and revision grids, revision materials, mind maps, all kind of things should try and, when you're doing revision, should focus on this. And again, it's one of those things to identify immediately when you're looking at the question. Is this a power of the monarchy question? Is it a government question? Is it a foreign policy or succession question? Is it a society and economy question? Is it a religion question? Is it a key individuals or groups question? And then that should help you organise your thoughts and think about the material that you need to go to answer it. I mean, that's if you're doing an exam. If you're doing it sat at home, it'll tell you which bit of your revision note, which bits of your class notes, or which bit of the textbook, or which bit of whatever it is you use to help you, that you go to on it. So right, this is foreign policy, and then you go look at the dates to work out which monarch it is. So the examples that are on screen at the moment are the key questions for 1C, which is the Tudor paper. But if you go to the specification, which you can find on the AQA website, then you'll be able to find what the 6 key questions are for your unit. And again, it's something that should be reinforced with you in school or college as well. So here are some examples of terms of breaking down the questions. So to what extent was poverty in England in the later 16th century a result of population growth? So we're looking at that. It's a consequence question, and it's a society and economic question. The main aims of English foreign policy in the years 1509 to 1529 was to achieve peace in Europe. Accessibility of this view, well, this is clearly, it's a foreign policy question, and it's a cause question. So we're combining the bit we've done earlier with the bit in terms of linking it to the key questions. To what extent was England's government fundamentally transformed in the years 1509 to 1547? And so that it links with our key question on how England was governed, and it is a change in continuity question. So immediately by doing this process, when I look at a question, then it's going to help me retrieve that information and write a good answer, because I've got a good idea what I'm talking about. Am I talking about consequence or cause or change in continuity or similarity and difference or significance? What is the theme that I'm looking at? And then I will have prepared, and I'll have been working on the different key questions, and so that should give me access to the information and the kind of arguments and things I should have prepared already, because you're not going to be able to prepare the exact questions that come up, but you should be able to prepare in terms of those themes. And if you go through all the past papers, what you should see is that you can link any question that's been asked on a paper to one of these key questions. Now, the paper twos, the question, the essay question should be much narrower in focus. So if you find yourself tempted to go and write about really long periods of time, then stop yourself, because that shouldn't be the case. They should have a really narrow focus, because they're examining depth, not breadth. And now you don't have the set of key questions in the unit 2, the paper 2 bits on the spec. You have this little bit of blurb which talks about concepts. And so, for example, in 2J, the American one, 1845 to 77, it says explores concepts such as political authority, abolitionism, and social justice. Encourages students to consider what creates social tension and harmony, the idea of nationhood, the issues surrounding political compromise. 2S, which is the modern Britain one, explores concepts such as government and opposition, class, social division, and cultural change. Encourages students to reflect on Britain's changing place in the world, as well as interrelationship between political policies, economic developments, and political survival. So all of those different bits should give you an idea of the kind of things you're going to be examined on. Now, the connection is not as direct in the paper 2 as is it with Unit 1, where it's got these 6 key questions. But again, this is something where you're thinking about the questions, and you're thinking about preparing for exams, that you should have in the forefront of your mind is these are the concepts that you should be learning, and it should be in the forefront of your teacher's mind as they're preparing you as they go through the course. So here's some more examples. So how successful was New Labour in creating a fairer and more equal society in Britain by 2007? So if I take some bits in terms of the concepts from the blurb on the previous bit, it says then one of the bits it's about is social division and cultural change, and this is a consequence question. How important were Lincoln and Douglas debates in the increased sectional tension in the years 58 to 60? And that comes from the concept of what creates social tension and harmony. And so that is a cause question. So as I've said, the link between concepts in paper 2 are less direct than the links to key questions in paper 1. But again, it gives you a good grounding in terms of preparing yourself and thinking about the kind of things that you're going to be asked. Unpicking questions is really, really important. Again, as I say, often what I find is students work really hard and they prepare themselves and they learn loads of stuff that happened. And so, and history is a really content-heavy A level, and so there's lots of stuff to learn. But when things go wrong, and they often go wrong in writing essay answers, they tend to go wrong in terms of people haven't really nailed down what it is they're supposed to be writing about. So we go through some of these bits we've talked about, and I'm going to add a few more in. So you should have thought about the question focus or type. So things like, is it a cause question or a consequence question? So does it relate to a particular key question or concept from the specification? So, for example, is it about the power of the monarchy or government or religion? So, for example, using the key questions from the Tudor one again. Right, the time frame bit is really important. I've had students do this before where they have written me essays and they've written about completely the wrong time frame. So rather than writing about Henry VII, they've written about Henry VIII or vice versa, rather than writing about Alexander III, they've written about Alexander II, rather than talking about the Conservative governments of the 1950s, they've written about Heath's government in the 1970s. So if you write about the wrong time frame, you're not going to get any marks. 0. If it could be the most perfect essay ever written, except if it's written about the wrong stuff, it's not relevant and you'll get no marks. One thing to particularly watch particularly with the paper one, with your breadth paper, is it'll be about 20 years. If you don't cover the 20 years, if you just write a really detailed essay about 5 or 10 of those years and you ignore the second half or the first half or whatever it is, then that's a partial answer, and really a partial answer shouldn't score more than level 2. Another really important bit to look for is well, what is it I'm arguing about in this essay? And essays are arguments. So, for example, I've talked about there being in hinge words or hinge phrases within a question. So, if we look at this example, the main aim of English foreign policy in the years 1509 to 1529 was to achieve peace in Europe. Well, the hinge in that is peace in Europe. So that's what I'm going to be writing about. Is that the main aim, or is something else the main aim? So that's the basis of that argument. Conservative stop-go economic policies in the years 55 to 64 fundamentally weakened the British economy. Well, the bit I'm going to be focusing on there is fundamentally weakened. So that's quite, and you often get this in these questions, that's quite a big ask. Fundamentally weakened. It's not just weakened it a little bit. To agree with that view in that bit, then I'm going to have to say that it had some really quite disastrous effects, and so that is really important in terms of the way that I then would approach that question. And it sets up what I'm going to do with things like my introduction and what I'm going to do with my argument and my conclusion and the links I make back to the questions I go through my essay. So again, it's worth identifying it and really kind of focusing down on that. In terms of a really good essay, there are a number of things that you need to think about and make sure that you do. So one of these is you've got to make sure that you have good focus. So you must address the question, you must think about the type, the concept, the hinge phrase or word that's in there, and keep coming back to it. And yet that should be at the start of every paragraph, it should be at the end of every paragraph. And you, again, as I've said, you must make sure you're writing at the right time frame. So essentially, focus means that you are consistently writing about the right stuff. You aren't wandering off and start telling narrative stories about that period of history. So you are actually really pinning it down, because another big enemy in terms of essay writing in history exams in particular is time. So a lot of my students often find they're really pressed for time, and if you've written lots of stuff that's not really relevant, then you've been wasting some of that time. So we look at this example. The main aim of English foreign policy in the years 1509 to 1529 was to achieve peace in Europe. Assess the validity of this view. So things that I would be thinking about in terms of my focus. This is a course question on the key concept of foreign policy. The hinge phrase is peace in Europe. Time frame is 1509 to 1529. So this is about the first 20 years of Henry VIII's reign. So we've got a little bit of councillor government at the beginning, and then we've got the important stage under Wolsey. You would therefore be writing about the aim to achieve peace in Europe and contrasting against other reasons, other causes for Henry's foreign policy, such as his desire for military glory and financial considerations and other considerations he had to have. with the power of other European powers at this point. So with that, I can then in a position to kind of crack on and really write about it. And if I'm not writing about those very specific things, then I've wandered from the point. Another important part of an essay is balance. So in the mark scheme, it says at level 5, the answer will be fully analytical with balanced argument. So and there's a direct thing in this for in terms of the way that your teachers will mark it. In terms that will be, if you only actually look at one side of the argument, then your answer will not get beyond level 3. So, and this particularly happens when a student feels very passionately about something, and so they want to really argue their point, but they might completely ignore the counter. Now, you can't do that. You can't completely ignore the counter argument. You have to address it. That's not to say that you have to be very mealy-mouthed about it and sit on the fence, because sitting on the fence is a bad thing. It's really painful. So again, if we go through it, the unpicking of the focus and type is really important. If it's a cause question, you are comparing causes, the cause in the question, to other causes. If it's changing continuity question, you're comparing the evidence of change against the degree of continuity. The hinge word can kind of shift the balance. Fundamentally transformed, it puts a really high tariff on it. So it is changing continuity, but a little bit of change isn't enough for fundamentally transformed. So if something changes it, but only a little bit, it's actually part of the counter argument rather than the argument for fundamentally transformed. So in your essay, you must give both sides. Now, one of the bits I've really emphasised to you all is try and avoid the GCSE traps, the GCSE pitfalls in terms of an undeveloped, unnuanced answer. So, for example, you can't write X was the most important cause and not the most important cause, or X was the most important cause, as was Y, because they can't both be the most important cause. So something is the most important cause, or it isn't. Now, there were other causes that played a role, but they were not as important as, or the cause given in the question was important to an extent. However, it's not the most important cause, because actually the most important cause is this. So you have to look at both sides, but please make sure you come out on one side or the other. So, for example, you cannot say government was both fundamentally transformed and not fundamentally transformed. It can't be both. There will be evidence that it was fundamentally transformed, and there will be evidence that it wasn't. But in terms of your judgment, in terms of getting when you're doing it, your judgment doesn't have to be balanced. Your essay has to be balanced. You can have more paragraphs on one side of the argument than the other. That is fine, but you must cover both sides of the argument, and you should do it to a decent degree. Another key part of essays, and this is the bit that I find students get absolutely fixated on, is knowledge. Level 5 says supporting knowledge will be well selected, specific and precise. And the bit that I really want to emphasize in that, and I've done it by highlighting in bold those two bits, supporting knowledge. That's what knowledge is there. It's to support an argument. Argument, judgment, analysis, that is the important bit. The knowledge is just there to support those arguments that you're making. The knowledge is not the star. And the other bit is just well selected, because although many students would love it, you are not going to get a question on the exam paper that says, tell me everything you know about Henry VIII or Alexander II or Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher or the American Civil War or Abraham Lincoln or any of that. It's not just going to say, tell me everything you know. Right? It's not going to be, write me a nice story about. So knowledge is not the star. The rest of the essay is the star, but the knowledge is that really important building block. So it is not simply the case of the student who knows the most gets the highest mark. Now, lots of knowledge will do little to raise your mark, in fact, unless it is well directed towards the question. If it is selected to support analysis and judgment, then it will do wonders for your mark. If it is just a story, it won't. But equally, if you have brilliant argument and analysis, but nothing to support it, and fundamentally the person reading your essay goes, you don't actually know about this, but you can present a nice argument, then again, you're not going to get to those very, very top levels. So you need the knowledge there. Just be careful how you use it. Paper 2 should have more depth to it than a paper 1, which are breadth papers. So, for example, you would know more about a particular year in a depth paper than you would do in a breadth paper. But in the breadth papers, the idea that you're covering the whole time period is really important. So breadth of detail. There have been some instances where I've seen in terms of some of the way some of the way that some of the paper ones are marked that suggest that they still actually like a lot of precision of detail, even though it's a breadth unit. Now, this I think is probably the most important part of your essay, which is your evaluation or analysis. So at level 5, which is the top level, it tells us that your answer will be fully analytical. This means that all the way through your essay you will be constantly weighing the importance of different factors in relation to the question. You will be assessing their weights, how much of a difference do they make in terms of the outcome of this argument, and not just saying on one side this, on the other side that. Well, on this side is this, and it's important because. In a cause question, you're going, right, well, this factor is more important than the others. If it is, then illustrate why. So, for example, if you remove that cause, would the event or development have not happened? Are other causes reliant on that more important one? So it's there as the building block. If that hadn't happened, then that wouldn't have happened. Therefore, this development or event wouldn't have taken place. Is it that there was long-term causes that had been sat there for a really long time, but actually hadn't been enough to cause this event, and therefore this key trigger that happened just beforehand? This is the really important thing. Without this catalyst, this change wouldn't have taken place. And it's stuff like that, and really kind of playing with those, the details of the different factors that are going to, again, illustrate these high-level analytical skills that they're looking for at the top of the mark scheme. Be comparative. Show a nuanced understanding by explaining that not all the points are equal. So, for example, there may be both change and continuity, but the level of change far outweighs the level of continuity. So, yes, that was kind of the same, and that was kind of the same, but that's not it's hugely important because, however, this change is, to quote the word, one of the ones you looked at, this is fundamental. This is government working in a completely different way to how it had done before. So there had never been a parliament of this length, or whatever it is. On balance, within your essay, there should be as much, if not more, analysis than there is knowledge. So it's not just about remembering all those facts, it's about using them effectively, and that's where the analysis kicks in. Now, ultimately, that analysis should lead to judgment. And again, the mark scheme tells us level 5 is well substantiated judgment. This means that you have supported your judgment to the extent that you can convince whoever's reading it of your answer, that this is the answer. And so you need to state these things quite strongly. And one of the ways I often say to people, just think about it, it's like being a kind of a barrister. You're not simply asserting a view, you are proving a case. So X is the most important reason because of A, B, C. Although it may be the case that that Y and Z are certainly played a role, these reasons are less significant because of D and E. Without X, the event development would not have taken place. So I am hammering home, like, this is important because of this. There are these other factors that are not as important because of this. Without X, basically this doesn't happen. This is the most important reason. Your central argument should run right through your essay from your introduction, and this is one of the bits I often look for in terms of what's going to be a level 5 answer. Is a level 5 answer is going to tell me the answer from early on, from the end of that last bit of its introduction. Now, something lower down can be a kind of voyage of discovery, and you can almost see the light bulbs going off in the writer's head as they kind of work out where they're going as they go. But that's not very convincing because you're discovering their answer at the same rate that they're discovering their answer. So it will still pick up marks, but a really strong one will tell you right from the beginning. Another bit of advice I would give is try and avoid using the first person, as it makes it look like you are just making assertions. So saying things like "I think" makes me think you're a bit unclear, and you're just plucking out. I believe that this is the case, and so I think I believe doesn't sound like it's going to be backed up by anything. It is the case that the evidence shows that it is clear because of X, Y. That is judgment. That is going to get you those top levels. And there are, particularly in the area of history, there's lots of people who might be reading your work who are going to be really put off by the use of first person. So it's worth trying to make it that bit stronger by avoiding terms like I believe. The next bit we're going to look at is a kind of an example introduction. So I'm looking at the question, the main aim of English foreign policy in the years 1509 to 1529 was to achieve peace in Europe. Assess the validity of this view. And in my introductions, what I suggest people do is they do 3 stages. They do definition, criteria, and judgment. So in the define bit, English foreign policy in the first 20 years of Henry VIII's reign was motivated by a number of different objectives and impacted on by circumstances. So I'm defining what I'm talking about. If the main aim was achieving peace, English foreign policy would be focused on conciliation and cooperation with other European powers, looking to build alliances and avoiding unnecessary war. So there I've set up, well, actually, if that statement was true, what would that have looked like in terms of foreign policy? So that's what I term the criteria. So then my judgment. There were times, as demonstrated by the Treaty of London, which is 1518, and the Field of Cloth Gold, which is a couple of years later, when Henry did seem to be aiming for peace, but his overriding motivation in foreign policy was seeking glory, and his preference was to do this through war. Now that's quite a short introduction. Ideally, it would be a bit longer. I would have gone into what the different objectives were in the first bit. And maybe a little bit more detail in the judgment, but fundamentally that is the kind of shape that a really good introduction would look at. Because reading that, then as someone marking that, I would go, well, the student knows what they're talking about, they know what the statement would look like if it was true, and they've told me what they're going to be arguing, and they've done it. What I've tried to show in that is that I've presented an argument. I've not said in this essay I will argue, because those words are just wasted. So you can make it clearer and more to the point by leaving all this I will go out and just go, right, this is the case. And that is then building the idea that you are presenting a case, you are presenting a judgment. In terms of the structure that follows that, both of these start with an introduction and end with a conclusion. Now, for illustrative purposes, and it is normally the case, you are looking for about 3 paragraphs on each side. Now, you pay money and you take your choice on this. So the first one is the more traditional one, where you do your arguments for and then you do your arguments against. I quite like the second one, where you do point and counterpoint, because it enables you to be a bit more comparative and immediately bounce it off. I also really worry about doing things like running out of time in an exam, and so if I run out of time after my third 4 and have to write a conclusion, I've got an unbalanced answer. I know there is no way on earth I'm getting above level 3. Now if I've done point, counterpoint, point, and then I have to put in a conclusion, I at least know I've got balance. Now, if they're really detailed paragraphs, if I've got some good argument, then maybe I've got a chance of a slightly higher mark. Obviously, the best thing to do is to finish the essay and do all of it. At which point, you might have a preference for one of those 2 different structures. Your teacher may have a preference for one of those 2 structures, but fundamentally, there are multiple different ways of doing it. So those main paragraphs, those 4 paragraphs or counterpoint paragraphs, whichever they are, they're what I refer to as peel paragraphs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of examples to illustrate these, where we look at how these are structured and put together. So I'm going to look at point, which is highlighted in yellow, evidence, which is highlighted in green, evaluation, which is in light blue, and link, which is in that kind of pinky purpley colour. And it's going to be over the next bit. And the first one I'm going to look at is this one. How important were the Lincoln-Douglas debates in increased sectional tension in the years 1858 to 1860? So I start with the point. Lincoln's attacks on slavery as immoral and conviction that it should face ultimate extinction played a key role in increasing sectional tension. So I picked up something from the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and this is an argument for the Lincoln-Douglas debates being important in causing sectional tension. I then go into the evidence. Well, the evidence, I'm going to look at the House divided speech. So Lincoln's House divided speech spelled out that he saw no long-term future for slavery, as ultimately America would have to choose to be all slave or all free. As he saw slavery as a moral evil, it was clear which way he would choose. Douglas was able, therefore, to easily portray Lincoln as an abolitionist, and this is something that the Southern press reinforced. So I've got evidence there, not only from the speech, it's a bit about the speech itself, but also about the way that it was received. And that's a really important bit about sectional tension, because it's really key in this bit of American history. It's not what's said and what's done necessarily that's of all overriding importance. It's the way that the other section, the North or the South, see what the other side has done. So then I'm going to move on to the evaluation, and we're going to continue that as we go on to the next slide of mine. So Lincoln's words and how Douglas and the South interrupted them played a role in increasing sectional tension immediately. This was clearly demonstrated by, and again, this is the bit I'm talking about backing up what you're saying, division of the vote in Illinois, where Lincoln took the North and Douglas took the South. This is one of those bits where I really want to be able to put pictures in essays, because if you draw Illinois and you show the way that the voting was split, it is quite remarkable. So essentially, all the North went to Lincoln, and the South, particularly the bit that touched on the slave states, all went to Douglas. The speech also stuck in the South's collective memory of his stance was hugely significant. It increasing tension when Lincoln stood for and won the presidency in 1860, in part leading to, and then going back into a bit more evidence, South Carolina's secession in December 1860. So I've got some evaluation about what it all meant, and I kept on linking it into stuff that I know. So I'm therefore effectively using that knowledge. It's well selected to use the quote from the Mark scheme. This demonstrates that Lincoln-Douglas debates were not only a key reflection of growing sectional tension, but also a catalyst for increasing tension. And that would then fit my argument in this bit would be that the Lincoln-Douglas debates do play a really important role. Not only did they show that there was sectional tension, because essentially you've got representatives from in part the two sides, but also these debates have actual kind of real life consequences, which mean tension is much higher. In particular, that when Lincoln 2 years later becomes president. So this is another example. This one's worked slightly differently because the evidence bit's more compacted and the evaluation's a bit more in terms of the traditional one. So how significant was the emancipation of the serfs 1861 to Russia's economic growth in the years up to 1894? So this is a paper one, Tsarist and Communist Russia question. So the point, emancipation freed peasants to go and live and work in the cities, creating a larger urban working class and giving a chance for greater economic growth. So again, very much focused on the question about emancipation and economic growth. And I go to the evidence. In 1864, 1 in 3 of the St. Petersburg population were peasants by birth, and this number continued to rise. There was a growth in industry such as oil in Baku in 1871 and new ironworks in Donetsk 1872. Russian industry grew substantially under the reforms of Vesnogradsky and Witt. Grain exports grew by 18% between 1881 and 1894, and coal production doubled. Right. I like economic questions because it's a really good one for just being able to throw a load of facts at it. And what I've tried to do in there is I've covered I've covered the whole time period, because emancipation is 1861. I've got something from the 1860s, something else from the 1860s, a couple of bits from the 1870s. I've got a date and then I look at something that happens in the 1880s into the end of the question in 1894. So in terms of a breadth question, that is really good use of detail because I've got quite a large spread. So I'm looking at that particular part of the question in detail. I then move on to the evaluation. Emancipation made this possible, as before it, the peasants had belonged to the state or the nobility and had not been able to leave their village. The The impact, however, was not as great as it should have been. Redemption payments and continued high taxation of the poor, coupled with the terrible conditions of the city, made many unable or unwilling to move to the cities. Right, and hopefully what you can pick up for that evaluation is, yes, I've made the point and I've backed it up with evidence, but I don't think this point is a particularly strong one. In theory, emancipation should have created a massive urban working class in Russia, but because it wasn't done properly, it didn't. And that's what I'm trying to get across in the evaluation. And this should then be shown again in the judgment. Growing up in working class by emancipating this was a key idea for promoting economic growth in Russia. However, it was so badly executed, it did not have the impact it should have done. So my judgment is going to be that it doesn't ultimately work. It was the right idea, it just doesn't ultimately work. So that hopefully the evaluation the link come to, and hopefully that what that illustrates is a way of getting around the fact that you are going to have to write points that disagree with your overall argument. So that is an argument that you would go against. There's points in there that would go against my overall argument. I kind of go, well, I don't think it worked. Well, there is some evidence it did work. But clearly it could have worked better. The final bit is a really good conclusion. So conservative stop-go economic policies in the years 1955 to 1964 fundamentally weakened the British economy. Assess the validity of this view. So between 1955 and 1964, overseas trade grew, the car manufacturing and construction industries expanded, as did production of electrical goods. Increased living standards suggested the British people never had it so good, which is a famous quote from the time. However, this must be seen in the context of favourable global economic conditions. The Conservatives concentrated on short term, with a lack of long-term economic strategy, weakening the economy. This was demonstrated when Macmillan seemed to move to end stop-go by setting up the National Economic Development Council in 1962. However, final proof of the failures of stop-go was shown by another giveaway election budget in 1963, which worsens Britain's balance of payment problem and left Britain's economy in a weakened position. Now, part of the bit I want you to think about in that fundamentally is there's a key bit which is missing. So that is a pretty decent conclusion. It's a pretty good conclusion. It's weighing up the evidence and it's coming down on very clearly on one side that the British economy was weakened by stop-go. But one bit I've not done in that would then have raised it even higher is I've missed out that word fundamentally weakened. So it left British economy in a weakened position. Now, if I'd gone into it and really dealt with this fundamentally, then that could have made that conclusion even better. So one way of looking at this is thinking, well, actually, how can I tweak that and improve it by drilling down into fundamentally weakened? So it is a bit weaker. Is it enough for fundamentally in there? And that again is a way of building your thinking skills and trying to make sure you maximize those marks. So I hope that's been helpful for you in terms of unpicking questions, thinking about how you think about them, how you structure them, and then some examples of the kind of stuff that you can write. And again, this is part of my kind of ranges of playlists on different bits of A-level history, which go through not only how to do the question types, but go through the content across the board in those units. There's also a huge playlist on my channel on A-level politics, if that's something you're studying as well. So good luck with your studies, and hopefully some of my videos can be of use to you. Thank you very much for watching.